the very fact that it's an open question with Trump as to whether he's a fascist or not, the very fact that we could be having that debate tells you everything. What they do is point back to 2016-20 and say, but he was president then and we didn't become a fascist state. Yeah, but we kind of know he would have liked to, or at the very least, like, he wouldn't be. And this
didn't want to leave office when he lost. I mean, that's all you need to know.
You quoted General Milley calling Donald Trump a fascist. You yourself have not used that word to describe him. Let me ask you tonight, do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I also believe that the people who know him best on this subject should be trusted.
That was Kamala Harris being asked point blank if she thinks that Donald Trump is a fascist, and she says yes. What does that tell us about the state of the American presidential race right now, 13 days out?
It says that Kamala Harris still isn't quite sure how to land a blow on Donald Trump. We are back to 2016, where no politician seems to have found the way to really hurt him. What does that mean for November the 5th? Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Lewis.
It's Emily. And later I will be speaking to Yulia Navalnaya. She is the wife, the widow now, of Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition leader who was poisoned and then incarcerated and then sent to a penal colony and then murdered by Putin. She has just published a book, Patriot, which is Navalny's own voice, essentially memoirs that allow him to speak to us from beyond the grave of everything that he was going through. And it is incredibly funny, it is electrifying, and by sheer dint that it even exists, it is devastatingly sad. I'll be speaking to her in a moment.
But we're going to start with where we are in the US race and the change of tone from Kamala Harris. When, Lewis, you and I were out for the Democratic convention, it was all this stuff about, oh, Donald Trump, he's not a serious person. He was to be laughed at rather than to be taken that seriously. Last night at a CNN town hall, which had originally been slated to be a debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, it's only Kamala Harris has turned up. She goes to a very different place when asked by Anderson Cooper, as we played in the introduction, whether she thinks Donald Trump is a fascist, and she says, yes, I do. Now, she tries to lay it off by saying, I'm just quoting Mark Milley, I'm quoting General John Kelly, I'm quoting everyone else. It's not me saying it, it's the people who've worked most closely with Donald Trump.
And I agree with it.
But I agree with it. But I agree with it. And that was the significant change, which raises all sorts of questions about how she's planning to run the last 2 weeks of this campaign.
I don't think she knows. I mean, I think that one of the things that was clear from that town hall debate last night, and actually just in terms of the sort of narrative shifts which have been going through, you know, in the sort of 100 days or so, fewer than that, since she became the candidate, she has burnt through approaches. She's burnt through stories that she's telling about herself and her opponent. John, you mentioned the most notable one, which is to go from laughing at him, calling him weird, to calling him a fascist. I think we should discuss whether she's right, by the way, because in some ways that is like the more substantive question. But at the same time, I think that the thing that I keep thinking, I think you can tell at the moment, is sometimes we wonder why American presidential campaigns are so long. Like, you have a primary process which seems to go on forever. I think what you can see sometimes with the Harris campaign is that she's paying the kind of price for the early momentum she got from coming in and being fresh and being different, which did give her early momentum. But the kind of cost to that has been that she didn't have a primary campaign. And a primary campaign and that run-up or that period after a primary campaign is very useful, because what it does is that it sharpens your message, it hones your narrative about yourself and your opponent, and it gives you a strategy for how you're going to wage the race. And I think that what we've seen over particularly the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so, as Trump has become somewhat stronger and Democrats have started to worry and to panic, is that she has not had that ballast that a primary period and a long run for a campaign would have provided her.
A primary race can also be very compromising.
It can be, yeah.
For a candidate, because you are boxed into a corner where you're essentially making claims to try and win your own side before you get into the ring. Look, I think we should remember that anyone who tells you that they know who's going to win the presidential election is probably not worth listening to at this point, because, as we say, we're talking about inches, not miles. We are talking about a fraction of the American population which may not even know right now if they're going to vote or how they're going to vote. And I think what you're seeing between Harris and Trump are two different strategies. That Harris is going after people who she thinks she can win over, i.e. voters who might be swing voters that she can pull over from the Republican Party, from the sort of Nikki Haley, the never Trumpers. Those are the people that she's aiming for. Trump is trying to get people off their sofas who might never have voted before. You know, the young man, the macho man, we've talked quite a lot about that, you know, his appeal to some of the younger men. He doesn't know whether they'll ever bother voting at all, right? They might be able to sort of, you know, run down their street shouting, yay, Trump, but are they registering? You know, he doesn't do what Taylor Swift's done, which is say, here's how you register. And fundamentally, you have to know, not just these people will shout your name in a crowd, but that they'll turn up, you know, either in early voting or postal voting or on the day itself, and they will do it. So I think they're going in slightly different directions, which is why I say, even though it feels like Kamala's lost momentum, and she clearly has not continued that momentum of the summer, we don't actually know which of these approaches will win you the presidency.
But I think the central tension of the Kamala Harris campaign is, am I the change candidate or am I the incumbent? And she's trying to do both. She tried to distinguish herself from Biden with that messaging that Trump was a weirdo, that Trump was to be laughed at, that Trump wasn't a serious person. Now she's back in the Biden strategy of he is a threat to democracy. He is a fascist. He doesn't play by the rules. He'll be a dictator on day one. And that is a real turning back to she is continuity Joe Biden.
I've got déjà vu. You know, we were doing all this in 2015. We were doing all this in 2016. We were kind of putting people on the spot. Everyone we talked to, we were saying, do you think Trump's a fascist? Do you think he's going to be a fascist? And actually, I think at the time the Democrats were really torn, weren't they? Because they were saying, well, we don't want to empower him by treating him like he's big, and we don't want to turn people off by making it sound like, you know, he's scary when he isn't. But you have got a record to go on now. And you actually have got a man who thinks he should have stayed in power after he lost.
But you've now got a Republican defence that you didn't have in 2015, 2016. The Republicans now say, oh, you've just got Trump derangement syndrome. Yeah. You poor person. Why don't you go and take a couple of paracetamol and have a lie down? All you're doing is parroting. And we've heard it all before from John Kelly, and we've heard it from Milley, and we've heard it from Mattis. Yeah. They're Trump haters.
Well, it's like the fact that there's a news story going around today about Trump having groped a young girl. And we've barely given it any attention because we're like, oh, yeah, believe me. We've seen Pussygate. We've done the tape. We've done this already.
I just want to introduce a character not many people will probably know, called Brian Kilmeade. He is the presenter of Fox and Friends, the breakfast show on Fox News. And Fox and Friends love Donald Trump. Brian Kilmeade has defended Donald Trump over the comments that he's supposed to have made to John Kelly when he said there were a lot of German generals I very much admired and they got things done. And this is Brian Kilmeade trying to smooth the waters on this one.
And then he obviously has frustration. And I could absolutely see him go, now, you know what? It would be great to have German generals that actually do what we asked them to do, knowing that's a third, maybe not fully being cognizant of the third rail of German generals were Nazis and whatever. But he was frustrated.
It's a simple mistake to make, isn't it? I've done it myself.
I know.
I love the uniform. I didn't realise that it was actually a Nazi salute.
I didn't realise there was that third rail of Nazis.
With the skulls on the caps, and a bit of a giveaway by any chance. But I think that, look, I mean, this is why I think Harris is doing. I think there is something else going on, right? Which is that they know, right, that no matter who comes out, no matter who has worked as closely as possible with Trump. If Melania came out and said, like, he's a fascist, he's planning a coup, they would just dismiss that. You know, it literally would not matter. They know that for the diehards, that it's not going to make a difference. There is still, though, I think the Democrats can see the early return voting data which is coming in, which is more favourable to Trump than they'd like. There are also interesting polling which came out in the last 24 hours, which they will have had access to long before similar sort of numbers, which is showing that actually in key states like Pennsylvania, Harris is winning among registered voters. She's not winning, or at least it's much closer, among likely voters. So they are worried about an enthusiasm gap, which partly comes from Harris's quasi-incumbency. And so I think a turn to hell is just around the corner. He's back. He's going to be worse than ever. He is a fascist. I don't think in that context that is that surprising, because there is ultimately a get out the vote operation, and they are worried about that enthusiasm gap.
I genuinely think she is doing everything. Trump's crazy to the crowd that want to see he's crazy. You know, if you're a young woman, you hate Trump. right? So everything that Kamala Harris is doing on TikTok is basically, he's crazy and he's going to ruin your life and he's going to make you never want to have sex again, right? So that's the sort of the young female vote taken care of. Then, as you say, he's a fascist, and this is what the generals say, is playing to the Nikki Haleys. There is a theory, we often talk about the shy Trump vote, that there could also be a shy sort of Haley vote, which is the people who really don't like Trump but don't really feel comfortable going Democrat, going Kamala Harris. You know, would you be telling your...
I mean, another one of the congressmen, Republican congressmen, who voted to impeach Donald Trump has come out and said, for the first time in my life, I'm going to vote Democrat in the presidential election.
But, you know, where's George Bush, for example? You know, I mean that seriously.
He's in Crawford, Texas, painting and staying as far away from a microphone and a camera
But he's going to
lens
vote.
as he possibly
Is he
can.
going to vote? He's not going to vote for Donald Trump,
and
right?
Harris is polling, you know, pretty well with those sort of soft-leaning Republican voters. So that's true. I mean, I think that, and the tension, right, is that basically throw everything against the wall strategy. Does that work? But when you were dealing with like an election which is in increments, which is in tiny margins, that could work. The tension, obviously, is that the message becomes confused and muddled and sort of all over the place. I mean, you said, Emily, the thing about reminding you of 2016. I mean, I also feel, you see so many sort of shades of that everywhere. You can even see it in the British political discourse at the moment, which is we're already back to that thing of like, oh, but he's not going to do that actually in person. You know, we had John Bolton yesterday, his former national security advisor, again, someone who knows him well, who has literally worked with him, saying, look, I think he'll pull out of NATO. And you've already seen in the British political reaction from people, you know, senior conservatives who are endorsing Trump, basically saying, yeah, but he wouldn't really. And it's like,
actually, on that one, I don't really trust John Bolton either. You know, John Bolton had the chance to speak up when he was actually working for Trump. But over the whole impeachment, he didn't give evidence.
But you know what I mean about the principle of it? I mean, just like everyone basically being like, oh, he'll be different in office than he was, which is exactly what the dynamic was in 2016.
And they don't need to go back to 2016 because, I mean, Kamala Harris is literally staging her last rally at the spot where Donald Trump was before the January the 6th riot. In other words, all they have to do is point. You know, they can do it in times and dates and places now and say this happened.
And look, we've spoken before on the podcast about Project 25 and this kind of blueprint of what a second Trump term would look like. And okay, Trump has managed to put the maximum distance between himself and the authors of this report. But the one bit he has embraced, and embraced it warmly, is the idea that he should have control over the Department of Justice, that he will decide who is prosecuted and who is not. And he has said he wants to see Joe Biden prosecuted, Kamala Harris prosecuted.
Yeah, but he said that about Hillary as well, and Hillary didn't get locked up.
But this time he has got enablers who are willing that on. And to your question, Lewis, earlier on in the podcast is, well, we should deal with the substantive question, is he a fascist? That says that is not the way that Democrats behave, that they control the justice system.
But this is what I mean, right? And I think this is the important question, which is like, we can talk all day about whether it works calling him a fascist as a piece of political strategy. We'll know in like a week and a half. The more substantive question, right, is he? And I think that the answer, because if he is, that is really worrying all over again. And I think that the answer to that is, because the Republicans or allies of Trump, as you say, John, what they do is point back to 2016-20 and say, but he was president then and we didn't become a fascist state. Yeah, but we kind of know he would have liked to, or at the very least, like, he wouldn't be. And this
didn't want to leave office when he lost. I mean, that's all you need to know.
But this is the difference with Trump, right, compared to every other American, certainly modern American political figure who has been president, basically anybody who's ever been president. Like, the very fact that it's an open question with Trump as to whether he's a fascist or not, the very fact that we could be having that debate tells you everything. And yes, you might just say, well, he's not quite a fascist, but you can say he's definitely an authoritarian. I mean, if you look up the Oxford definition of fascism, authoritarianism, well, yeah, we know he'd like to be an authoritarian. Ultranationalism, America first. Suppression of opposition, he says he wants to lock up his political opponents. Militarism and violence, he's literally created an insurrection. Anti-communism and anti-liberalism, check. Propaganda and cult of personality, check. Like, again, you can have an argument about, like, whether or not, what sort of fascism. He's not necessarily Hitler.
Yeah,
but the very
you know
fact
what?
that you can have the argument and come up and basically have a credible case to say yes tells you that he's a unique political figure with a unique political
profile. But I think
profile.
if the Democrats wanted to lock this down and put a massive, like, 5-point lead between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, they just have to talk about the economy. And that is the simplest thing in the world. It's the thing she has not managed to do, because most of this talk of fascism, genuinely, terrifying for everyone here and many of our listeners, goes over the heads. I mean, if she just talked about the tariffs that he's trying to bring in, if she just said, his tariffs will make all your goods much more expensive, you will be in trouble, it will hurt, that would arguably be a far more effective message for the last 10 days.
And that is what she's got to do. She's got to land the argument. I mean, Joe Biden kept on saying the economy has turned a corner, it's doing great, it's humming, it's all the rest of it. And there was dissonance because it didn't relate to people's lives of their experience of filling the grocery trolley or filling the car with gas. That created a sense of, I don't know what you're talking about, Joe Biden. My life isn't like that. She has tried to navigate it more carefully to say, this is what America can be, this is what America will be. And that economic message has got to land. But as we said at the outset, we are talking this being a coin toss election. The coin is in the air. Anyone who says they know how it's going to land is making it up. And maybe it's not about any of this messaging. Maybe it is purely about the ground game on November the 5th of reaching those people and getting cars to them and all the rest of it so that they do go out to vote rather than just sit on their couch.
In a moment, we'll be speaking to Yulia Navalnaya, whose husband, Navalny, was murdered by Vladimir Putin. And we're going to be asking what Western leaders should be doing with Putin now, 13 days out from the US election. Well, joining me now is Yulia Navalny. She is the widow of Alexei Navalny, who was poisoned, then imprisoned, then incarcerated in a penal colony in solitary confinement, and then murdered by Vladimir Putin. And she's published a book called Patriot, which is written in Navalny's own words. It's like his voice is coming back from the grave, Yulia. And I guess it's a book that was essentially written far too soon.
It wasn't. Hello, first of all, and thank you for having me. It wasn't, because Alexei started to write this book right after his poisoning in 2020. So it took almost 4 years. Of course, I would love this book would be published at least 40 years later.
Yeah.
Spending all my life with my beloved husband, with our children, with their children, and then finally sitting and reading this book when he is grandfather and I'm grandmother, but our life took another path. And it was very important to me to do everything possible to bring this book to people who cares about my husband, to people who cares what's going on in Russia, to people who cares that we need to make the world a better place.
I was really surprised by how funny it was. Like, even from the first page, it's darkly funny, darkly humorous. It opens with his poisoning on that flight when he's coming back from Tomsk, and the opening scene is him struggling to get to the bathroom on the plane and thinking he's going to die there.
That's true. Even in awful circumstances, my husband was every time and all the time very optimistic. I think it was his superpower which gave him strength to be confident in these awful torturing conditions in prison, after poisoning, and even before, because all these secret services, all these police people, they were following him for many years. He was imprisoned every year several times. They were like short imprisonments. Just first of all, at the beginning they were 2 weeks. Then they started to put him in a prison for 1 month, and they decided to put him in a prison for years.
Yeah, and when he's being poisoned, the plane makes an emergency landing, and he's taken to a hospital. And there are whispers to you from kind medical staff that if you don't get him out of Russia, he will die. And you get him to Germany.
it wasn't just about the whispers. When I arrived to this hospital the same evening, it was obvious that something wrong is going on, because, I met this doctor-in-chief who was so kind of polite, but I can feel that he's not honest with me. And the next time there were a lot of policemen and Secret Service agents, and they just flooded the hospital. And of course, you couldn't imagine how it was. It was obvious that they are going to hide something.
Yeah. And so you get him to Germany, and he has a very slow recuperation. He has to learn to walk again, to talk again, to hold a cup. And finally, he decides that he's going to go back to Russia. And he wants to make sure that he's recuperated enough in case he gets thrown in prison. You all know he's going back to Russia, even though Putin has tried to kill him.
Alexei didn't decide to go to Russia finally. He knew that he is going back to Russia the first day when he started to realize the current situation at this moment. And it was very important for him to show that he doesn't afraid, to motivate and encourage people around, to show them that it's important not to afraid, because nothing to afraid of. The one power which Putin has is just keeping people around him in fear. And of course, my husband was the best example to show that there is no reason to afraid.
But there is a reason to be afraid.
It was reason to be afraid, to be imprisoned, and so on. Of course, it's very complicated situation, but when you live and my husband, it's much easier to take these decisions. You just know that he will do these things because he thinks that these things are right.
And you never tried to talk him out of it? You never discussed it and said, what are you doing?
We discussed politics a lot. We discussed the current situation a lot, but asking him, telling him, what are you doing? No, I never told him that.
Sure enough, the moment that the plane lands, it has to be diverted to get away from all these supporters and all these crowds that are waiting to welcome him home. And once it lands at Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow, he's arrested and he's taken to prison in Moscow. And he's allowed a paper and pen for an hour and a half a day. Do you talk about him making the diaries, making the book from prison?
I think it was his decision about diaries, and I was very surprised to get the first time these diaries from prison. But about the book, it's not about me and him. A lot of people last years we were trying to persuade him to write the book, and it was obvious that my husband has a lot to tell about politics, about his life, how he became the leader of democratic Russia, and a lot of people believe that one day he will become a president. He started to write. He was sure that he has a lot of time. He wanted to live this life, and by the end, as we have already discussed, to write the whole memorials. And also, it was another reason why he didn't want to write, because he really loved books. And that's why, for him, the writers, all his life, were some kind of special people. And my husband was a very good writer. Everybody who followed his blog and his site and all his social medias know how good a writer he was. But still, he was very shy and very modest in this way. He wasn't sure that he could write a real book. And and so he tried to postpone this moment. But I think we never discussed it like directly, but I think something has changed in his mind after poisoning. So he just realized that something can happen in your life the next day. That's why he started to write.
He felt mortal.
Probably.
Let's just go back to his childhood to understand what happened that made him want to live that life, as you're saying, as Russia's leading opposition politician, the man who could take on Putin, because he remembers the Chernobyl disaster. And he cites that as being the moment he realised that the Russian state was not on the side of the Russian people. They were lied to.
That's true, and I think now the situation is continuing. It's the same, and it's very important to separate Putin and Russian people. And it but it was in Soviet Union, and all the Soviet Union was built on lies. And now it continues with Russia by Putin's power.
What do the Russian people think about the Ukraine war? I mean, do they know what's going on?
Of course, they know. There are a lot of people against the war, but still there are a lot of people who are watching TV every day. And I wouldn't lie, the propaganda in Russia is very strong, and people watch TV a lot. So there are people who just watch this TV and they don't want to be involved in politics. So they're taking a look at news and they believe to this news. But still there are a lot of people inside Russia and outside Russia who left the country because they didn't want to go to this war, who are against the war and with Ukraine and against Putin's regime.
Because there's talk now that Putin will put prisoners, even people awaiting trial, into the Russian army to fight in Ukraine.
That's really crazy situation. When I started to read this news about that Putin starts to release all these murderers, killers, people who did really heavy crimes, I couldn't believe in it. How could it be? And it continues. And now, if I think that I'm right, that even people who are not in prison but in the court, if they sign contract, they just forgiven. The contract to go to Ukraine's war, they're just forgiven by the court. That's awful. What to say in this situation? That's crazy situation. I couldn't believe, how could it just that we discuss it and how it happened in 21st century. That's crazy and awful situation.
Your husband was so powerful and so visible and so courageous in his fight against Putin. And yet Putin is still stronger than ever. And nobody seems to be able to bring him down or remove him or stand up to him. What is the answer to that?
I absolutely disagree with you. I don't think that Putin is a strong leader. Keeping people in fear and to be a strong leader, in good way, strong leader, it's absolutely different words and meanings. I think just that a lot of people are living around him under, not his inner circle, but people in Russia, they live under huge understanding that they could be repressed for a lot of things, like for in social media again, or for such post where they write no war. But still, he's not a strong leader. He's the person who's keeping this power for more than 25 years and who brought our country in many ways, politically, economically, internationally, down for many, back for many years.
Yeah. Do you think he will lose in Ukraine? or do you think he'll get what he wants?
I think that when he just realized that he's losing his popularity, the very good reason to stay, popular all the time, to start the war or to do such kind of things. And that's what Putin did, and he's going in this way to keep his power. And it's awful again, and this war should be stopped, not immediately. It never could be happened. So it should be stopped yesterday or never happened.
Yeah. But if he continues to feel that he's losing popularity, does he advance further than Ukraine? Does he go into parts of Western Europe?
I don't think that we are able to discuss this question in a proper way or to find the right answer, because he's doing such strange things. Some people call him crazy. I'm not sure that he's crazy, but he just does what comes in his mind. So I don't have answer on this question, what he's going to do tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And I don't think it's about me. I don't think anybody, even around him, knows what he wants to do tomorrow and what will come to his mind tomorrow.
He was scared of Navalny. He wouldn't mention him by name. He used to treat him like somebody who didn't exist. And I'm wondering what you think, since his death is in Putin's head.
He was scared of Alexei for sure. And after he killed him, he named him by his last name. And again, coming back to your previous questions, it means like he is not strong. He's very weak. He was able to call my husband by his last name after he killed him.
And now there is news at home. A Russian senator is saying, you, also not called by your name, you're going to stand for parliament, you're going to stand for the presidency in Moscow. Are they scared of you now?
I'm very surprised. I was sure that they are not scared of me yet a lot, but usually these senators, they mean nothing. They just follow the words which they were giving by some authorities and some officials who stand high in Kremlin and manage them. So in this case, I'm very surprised that he mentioned me, and they worry about me a lot and about my words that I am going to participate one day in election campaign.
You would like to stand for the presidency, but not until Putin's dead?
I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible until Putin in power. And now it's not. I'm not just able to come back to Russia, because it's obvious now they open several criminal cases against me, and I will be arrested in the airport.
Do you feel that the West understands Putin? Do you feel that You're shaking your head. I mean, the messages coming out of our country, from our leaders, from Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, what should he be doing, saying?
I don't think that I can give good advice, but unfortunately nobody can find the right way to make Putin fallen right now at this current moment. But it's not about current moment, it's about past. I think this is the biggest problem that for many years West was trying to play with Putin these kind of games, pretending that he's elected president, that they closing their eyes on all the Putin's corruption, inviting him to the international events.
What should they do then?
not to do like they behave now, not to invite him, not just because he started the war, because when he started the war, it was too late. They needed to do it before. When they knew about all these policies, when they knew that he's opening cases about his political opponents, when he started to send them in prison.
So you're saying the warning signs were there all the way through, that they just chose not to look at them?
Absolutely. When Putin just realized that he's doing awful things, I just want to remind very one probably small for all the world, but for our family it was the very big episode. They put it in prison my husband's brother for 3 years just because he's a brother of Navalny. And it was like, come on, it's just nothing. We continue to meet with this Mr. Putin, president of Russia, speaking with him, like it happened something. But it couldn't happen in normal democratic country. Nobody puts their political opponents in prison. And if he does it once or twice, so he will continue to, to spread these field, and he will continue to get more power. And of course, West lost this moment.
There's a debate happening in America right now about whether to call Trump a fascist. Kamala Harris said last night, yeah, I think he's a fascist. America is not Russia, and America is a democracy, and Russia isn't. But do you think that Western leaders, European leaders, are about to make the same mistake with Trump?
I still believe in democratic institutions in America. I think that Americans will do the right choice, and still they do have, they have independent media, independent courts, they have Congress, they have Senate, and it means a lot. So these democratic institutions are able, it seems to me, to keep, the situation under control. And I'm all the time very, I don't know how to call it, jealous about all this, because we never lived in such kind of atmosphere at least last 25 years. Yes, I can understand that situation probably difficult and so on, but still they have debates, they have independent media who support different candidates. All this, as I have already said, independent courts, it makes situation absolutely different.
Let's end by talking about Alexei Navalny. He became a threat. He's thrown in prison after they've tried to poison him. And yet there is a resilience to him in prison, which is extraordinary in the pages of his book, that he still finds tiny joys. He still talks about his recipes when he's cooking. He still talks about the books that he's reading. He still makes jokes about you, about himself, about the Russian state. Where does that resilience come from?
If I know the answer, I think it's about my husband. It's about Alexei Navalny. He was a special one, and unfortunately, the rest of the world will know it after his death.
So many people have asked him the same question. Why did you go back? You knew what would happen. You knew that you'd already been poisoned. You knew that they'd try to kill you. When you are trying to make sense of it now, and this is very new for you, Yulia, because he only died in February, do you imagine a different life? Do you replay that scene of getting on the plane and think, what if?
We are sitting now and discussing it today, but it's about to taking the right or wrong decisions at the current moment. So at that moment, I and him especially, we were sure that he wants and he must come back to his supporters, to continue to change his country, to give an example. Of course, today probably we can take a look at this situation by very, very different corner. But at that time, it was obvious for both of us that he doesn't have different choice.
And is there a message that you would give to people listening, particularly if they're listening in Russia, or if they want to know how do they carry on what he did?
I know that after his death, they support him, and me, and they remember about him a lot. And I just want to say that I remember about all these people who supported my husband, that they are inside Russia under the huge repressions. But I know that they are against Putin's regime. I know that they are against the war, and I'm very sure that one day the good changes will become in our country. The war in Ukraine will be stopped, and we probably very slowly but become a normal European country who cares about their citizens, who doesn't start war with their neighbors, and just living their normal life.
Yulia Navalnaya, thank you.
Thank you.
Before we go, we are scattering, and this will be the last time all three of us are together until it's election time in the US, when we'll all be together in the US. You are off to Miami, Florida.
Yes.
On Saturday.
At the weekend, yes. And we're going to, in anticipation of the election, rather than spending loads of time, which we've all done, you go to swing states and you're trying to sort of pass exactly who might win. It's basically impossible in an election this tight. We're going to try and sort of ask a different question, which is, how can it be, in a way it's sort of like been part of the conversation we've had today, despite everything, how can it be that Donald Trump is not only in this race, not only highly competitive in this race, but actually, on what we're seeing now, probably just about favoured to win this race? And as we've sort of talked about before on the show, part of that is just a big picture story about what's happened to American politics, and the epicenter of that is Florida, a state that used to be the state of the hanging chads, the swingiest of swing states, and is now basically ruby red. So we're going to try and tell that story, big picture stuff.
And you're going out on Friday. I'm going out on Friday.
Yeah.
We're heading to Pennsylvania. That is now has the mantle of the swingiest of swing states. And Kamala Harris is crossing it so intensively right now. It's really interesting compared to Hillary Clinton, who we remember sort of avoided places like Wisconsin and parts of Ohio right up to the last wire. Kamala Harris knows that she lives or dies in Pennsylvania, and that's where we're going to be.
I should just pull the curtain back a little bit on just before we came into the studio and we were discussing Lewis going to Miami. I said, you've got to stay on Collins Avenue at Miami Beach. At which point Mateless comes up and says, no, don't be ridiculous. Why would you want to stay on Collins Avenue when you could stay on Ocean Drive? Lewis says, will you two stop arguing like we're kind of
podcast mum and dad, bringing back bad memories.
It's almost like we sound like smug twats when you reveal this out loud.
but yeah, exactly, amazing.
So
no one's ever called us smug.
Never thought of it.
That's
like
never
that
ever
before.
happened.
Yeah, but I looked up Collins Avenue and it's on the kind of, it just says which is better to stay on, Collins Avenue or Ocean Drive. This is obviously an argument.
Collins Avenue, you get all the drunks, and
let's
Ocean
not
Drive,
go there.
you just get a view of the
Just
sea.
insulted all of the drunks of Collins Avenue.
Collins Avenue, fabulous buildings.
You know,
Right,
someone.
goodbye.
Talking about that, I actually ran into someone the other day who actually thought you were my mum and dad. They were like, I love the show you do. It's so nice you do it with your mum and dad. I didn't quite have the heart to tell him that you were.
But the latest
Do you know what
thing-
that means? It means he's interchangeable, and we can actually bring in any of our children at
Oh,
any
thanks a
point.
bunch.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic
When you
news.
go
Come on,
off to
Milo.
university, I think it's time you moved out of home.
Yes.
Also, can you tidy your bedroom, please? We'll
I'll
see
do
you
my
soon.
best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.